Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the class supplement, the Dancer class, designed by Taron Pounds and Nate Butler for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. So D&D 5e is more about the subclasses than the actual classes. It's been, 5 or 6 years since 5th edition came out, and we've had exactly one new official class released in that time, being the Artificer. Bloodhunter is kind of a weird gray area, but official, like Wizards of the Coast produced class. But we've had a lot of subclasses, and I'm generally a fan of the way that works. It reminds me of old video game RPGs where you would start off as a more generic class, like a, baseline warrior, a baseline wizard or something, and then you would unlock more advanced classes, and it's a more user-friendly experience, and that way you don't have to plan everything from the start and be like, oh, I need to be a specific, class out of one of 30 classes. Instead, you can start off as something, more basic in mind, and then you can specialize when you reach that subclass, although in D&D's 5th edition ends up having pretty quick, because anywhere from 1st to 3rd level you're basically choosing your specialty. My point is that I typically don't like having new classes in 5th edition, because I think the subclasses work better as a form of specialization, and I feel like we've pretty much covered most of what we need with the existing, whatever it is, 13 classes. That being said, the Dancer is a really goddamn great class. In fact, this designer, I previously reviewed the Merchant class and absolutely loved it. Thought it was one of the best products I'd probably reviewed this year. And just an amazing new class with new gameplay mechanics. And this is along the same lines, which means it is the rare class. And I'm already kind of biased against classes in 5th edition, because again, I think it's better to make a subclass than as a class. But this is the rare class that actually does fill a much needed niche that is not supported in 5th edition necessarily, which is a support class that does not rely on spells. And I think it's really great to have a class that's not a spellcaster, because if you include all the subclasses with like fighter and rogue, like pretty much everybody's a damn spellcaster now, and it really is lame that so many unique classes basically fall back on spellcasting. In fact, it breaks my heart that the Bard, which should be a chance to use unique, song-based spells, which did happen in previous editions of D&D, is basically just a full-blown full caster now with like Bardic Inspiration. That's not good enough to me. And I think the Dancer is good enough, and frankly is more to what I think the Bard should have been, which I'm giving very high praise to the Dancer because of that. So it's a really, really cool class because it uses its own resource system. It doesn't just use spell slots and spells. In this case, it's the Dance Flares. This is also a 20-page class supplement because it includes 7 different subclasses, because again, it's a full design class. So you've got the 1 through 20 progression, and then at level 3 you choose your Dancer's Choreo, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, where you pick your subclass essentially. So that becomes a whole lot of more information and details to learn. But let's go over the baseline of what a Dancer is. So a Dancer, I've played obviously a lot of video game RPGs and stuff like the Dragon Quest games and Final Fantasy Tactics and Fire Emblem, and all those games are all about the classes. And this one is Dancer literally exists in the Fire Emblem games, specifically as a mostly non-combative unit that you can use to grant your other units an additional turn, which does appear as an ability that you get as part of this class. It's called Step Up, and as at 2nd level, you can use your action to grant another creature within 30 feet of you. They can move up to their speed and take an action. Now, this is interesting because that's a very powerful ability, but it takes your action to do it. When you're controlling a party of characters or classes, or a whole army in the case of Fire Emblem, it's a lot easier to designate one character as purely support. In fact, that's often a very good strategy. But when you are only playing one single character, I imagine it would maybe feel bad to just on your turn grant somebody else the ability to do more things on their turn. So I don't think it translates as well to controlling a single support character, even though the class is defined as support. Just for that one ability that I'm complaining about. But the class fixes itself when you get to 5th level. So at 2nd level, you get the step up ability. And I know I'm getting ahead a little bit, but I want to explain it. And then at 5th level, you know, a lot of characters get really powerful things at 5th level, right? That's when 3rd level spells come online for pure spellcasters. And that's when your main marshals get all their extra attacks. They get a lot of huge, usually ability spikes at 5th level. Well, the dancer can now use, via the double time feature, can use their step up and use one of their flares as part of the same action, which means you can grant somebody else an additional turn, essentially, and you can use one of your signature abilities. So it takes a few levels, but at that point you become very, very powerful and still a good supporter. So I'm a big fan that the designer did that. It still makes me feel bad about a pure tier 1 dancer because I don't know how often you'd actually use step up. It still could come up. Like if there's a ranged enemy and you're like, well, let's just give my, you know, good ranger or a flying enemy or whatever. Let's just give my good ranger, you know, the ability to take another shot. Then I'm going to use my action to do that. But I think it would still feel bad until you get to that 5th level feature. And then all of a sudden you can do that and still do your other cool things. Your other cool things being the dance flares. So these are kind of a mix between warlock invocations and the fighter battle master, I think it is, maneuvers, which are a lot of things I cite as being really good class specific features that really help define that class that are I would say outside of spellcasting, but obviously like half the warlock invocations just grant you new spells, which is a bummer. I feel like they should be more unique in that way. So the flares, like the warlock invocations, you know a certain amount, or like spells, I guess in general, you know a certain amount at the beginning, and then you gain a few more as you level up. And the flares are all listed at the very end, so we're just going to skip to the end of this class sheet. And there's over 20 of them, and they offer a bunch of really cool things that you can do, and there is no resource involved for doing them. There is no, like, you can only use this thing, you know, a number of times equal to your proficiency, or you've got certain, points that you're expending. No, you can just use this shit all the time because you're just dancing and creating certain magical effects, which is awesome. I love a class that can actually use all of those things, use all their abilities. They don't have to manage some kind of per rest resource necessarily. And they can do things, I had to write all these down, like granting temporary hit points, granting additional speed, pushing enemies around, leaving a lightning trail as they move, which is called the electric slide, which is funny as shit. They can knock enemies prone. They can do debuffs and buffs. They can do healing. One of them, the irresistible jig, is obviously the, I think it's really called like Otto's irresistible dance or something like that, which is that effect. There are some prerequisites here and there, but there's not very many. Most of them are just kind of general buffs or debuffs that you can take pretty much at any time. So they're not nearly as prerequisite heavy as the Warlock Invocations are. There's an AoE short rest. Essentially, you can allow everybody to roll their hit dice to try to heal in the middle of combat. You can grant somebody an additional save opportunity if they're paralyzed or something. You can empower your allies' crits. There's just a shit ton of stuff you can do that all help define you as being a support class. And all of these subclasses further give you an additional one that helps define that subclass, and it becomes kind of your signature flair that you end up using as part of that subclass, which is fantastic. There's obviously some funny nods to actual like dance moves and things. Like we have the electric slide. Moonwalk is certainly one of them that allows you to kind of use a lower version of the Moonbeam spell, which can reveal shape changers, but also, it does deal some damage. Bewildering Grace is a fantastic one because essentially, as an action, you just roll a d20 and figure out what happens. It's very much like the Wild Magic table. Now, this one causes you to incur a level of exhaustion afterwards, which is normally really, really bad because exhaustion is a system that can get very bad very quickly and only goes away on a long rest. However, the dancer has another ability when you get to level 5 that you actually cure exhaustion on a short rest, which is pretty big and would pair very well with a nice side of Bewildering Grace. This one, Wild Magic, is pretty obviously, if you roll less than a 10, it's pretty bad. If you roll over a 10, it's good in terms of crazy. You cast Shrink, or you cast Enlarge, or you summon a demon, or everybody is transformed into a little, bunny or something. So really funny, Wild Magic stuff that folks really like. There's just a lot of really cool options here, and you get a ton of them. Like I said, at level 1, you can choose 3, which is pretty good, and then every other level you choose an additional one. So like, what is the progression? Like by the time you're level 10, you have 7 of these flares. Like that's huge and gives you a lot of really fun options to work with. And that doesn't even include your subclass stuff. So that's all low level material. Like you get that, you start getting dance flares at first level, step up at second level, which is you're granting an ally an additional turn, which is very much the Fire Emblem Dancer class. And then at 5th level, you can do that step up and part of your own flare. So now you can start seeing these cool combos of being a pure support class, or you could use your flares to deal damage too. Like they're not all just, buffing and debuffing. You gain evasion at 7th level, which is very solid. Interestingly enough, when you do your flares, they include movement. And you don't get a free disengage until 10th level. And until then, everybody has disadvantage on you when you're moving. So that's kind of an interesting balance where it doesn't give you that free disengage, but that's actually a class feature called Don't Stop Me Now. But so I think that was pretty interesting that it just incurs disadvantage, so you don't necessarily screw yourself constantly. By the way, I kind of glossed over the actual stats of this class, but you have a D8 for hit points, no armor proficiency, and only simple weapons. You are not meant to be a warrior at all. I mean, 10 of those, I guess those are the stats of a monk, really, but you don't have the unarmored defense that a monk does. So it does make you a lot weaker. However, at least 2 of the subclasses completely fix those holes to the fact that they're very strong subclasses and actually do make you kind of a melee fighter at that point. My only real complaint is that the higher level abilities aren't very exciting. They're fine. Like 14th level, you can add your charisma modifier to your flare dice. So anytime something calls for a save or damage or something, you get to roll flare dice, which scales as you level. So at 14th level, you can add your charisma modifier to all of those. At 15th level, you actually get to use your flare dice instead of d20s if you have advantage, and you can re-roll one of those flare dice. Now at 15th level, if you see, that means you're rolling 4d6, which I believe is better than rolling a 1d20. And you can re-roll one of those d6s, so odds are you're going to roll pretty well. So that's a nice feature, but only when you have advantage, and that's really all it does. Beyond that, I wasn't very impressed with the abilities. However, the elusive 18th level ability, no attack roll has advantage against you. That's obviously very, very powerful because a lot of enemies will try to get attack advantage on you, but it's also not like a thing you're doing necessarily. It's not an active ability or something exciting. It's just, okay, I've got this extra, defensive buff on me. And then the actual 20th level, Curtain Call, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to balance level 20 abilities, let's be honest. Like, there's not, hardly any D&D games are going to be made up here, and there's not a whole lot of balance involved. But it doesn't seem that exciting to want to go all the way to 20 with a dancer. You can use your step up feature as a reaction whenever you're rolling initiative. So you can have somebody else go again, and then you basically gain them a bunch of buffs and stuff. You just become slightly better at single target buffing. Again, level 20 ability it seems more like a flare or something. So not too exciting on the high level abilities, but the subclasses are in general pretty good. There's only one of them that I thought I didn't find was interesting at all. But for the most part, I think they do a pretty good job of specializing the class into different avenues, which is exactly what I want from subclasses. Brandish Blade is by far the most powerful, at least on paper that I can tell. You straight up get like all the warrior stuff. When you take the subclass at 3rd level, you gain basically unarmored defense. However, it's scaled to your charisma and your dex, which are already going to be your highest stats anyway. So 10 plus your dex plus your charisma. You also gain martial weapons proficiency that have the finesse property because you're going to, dex is going to be your highest stat anyway. You gain the option of 2 different fighting styles, dueling or 2-weapon fighting, and you gain a free flare in Saber Dance, which basically just allows you to attack, and I believe if you get a crit, you can add your flare die, so it's not the most exciting flare. However, this subclass will allow you to upgrade that flare later on. And then the craziest thing is that's already very powerful, right? It's very, and even the designer even makes a nod that's like, yeah, it's similar to the Bard College of Valor and basically turning the support class into a fighter. But at 6th level, you can turn your weapon into its own dancing sword, which is a stat block, I believe, in the monster manual. In this case, it's the dancing blade. But essentially, it can act on its own and move. I mean, I think it goes on your initiative, but that's a really cool feature and obviously goes with the whole dancer thing, the fact that your weapon is kind of dancing along with you. I thought that was a really fun thing, although it also makes this class even more powerful because they were already at a lot going for them when they essentially almost become a multi-classed fighter and then also get the ability to summon their own like dancing sword. So very, very cool. Thumbs up on that one. Idolized Superstar is, you're just like a diva, you're a famous singer or whatever, or famous dancer, I guess in this case. I couldn't really wrap my head around this one because the abilities didn't seem that interesting. Most of them are out of combat, kind of maybe more role-playing heavy abilities, which is fine, but I think you need to balance those with combat. And then the one like third level flare you get is odd because it's essentially, it's not a taunt, but it's similar to, I forget what spell this is. It's not Sanctuary, but I think it's a paladin like challenge thing or something where anybody who doesn't attack you has disadvantage. But you would not want, again, a baseline dancer doesn't have defense. You don't have any armor or anything, so you would not want people to attack you. So it's weird to have that ability where you're kind of wanting, it's almost like a taunt, but for a class that does not want to tank at all. So that one was kind of weird for me, and I didn't feel like any of the abilities were very interesting. Noble Court, you are essentially a courtier, I guess, somebody who has performs in high-end, luxurious avenues, and thus you've got rapier proficiency. You're very good with a rapier, and you have a more domineering, I guess, personality because your free flare is essentially the command spell, which essentially works that way, and it just makes it so you're better at commanding people. There's a funny thing where if you give people step up, which is that free action, if you dictate them to do something and they do it, then they get extra like buffs to doing it. So that was kind of you could role play that in interesting ways. So that's kind of a cool mix of like role playing and combat usefulness. The Rallying Harbinger, which is a cool name, is if the Brandish Blade was the more offensive fighter multiclass, this is like the defensive fighter multiclass. So you actually straight up get armor proficiency, just light armor, but still, and shields. You gain fighting styles, but they're all the more defensive ones, literally defense and protection. The Rallying Stomp allows you to extend your allies' crit range of their weapons, which is a pretty big freaking deal and would be kind of weird to keep track of, as well as granting damage resistance to yourself, which is pretty huge. You can also grant other people additional attacks whenever you use that step up ability. So, so you're still a support class, but now you can support people by helping them tank. Sylvan Mirth is more of a control class. So your main flare here, the Hedonistic Revel, is actually very flexible. You can either do a single target charm, frighten, or sleep, which is pretty damn useful on those. You also, on Pixie Tricks, this has a weird mechanic. Essentially, you can gain the ability to bonus action, teleport, or invisibilize yourself. Invisibilize? Turn invisible, which is very, very powerful. In order to trigger this, you have to use your step up feature, which is to grant somebody an extra action. And then you roll your flare dice, which scale as you level. And if the result of one of the dice is lower than your proficiency bonus, which also scales when you level, then this triggers. So I kind of like the way the mechanics work to get that off, because as you level up, you become better at triggering this. And obviously being able to freaking teleport or turn invisible as a bonus action is huge for a support class. So that's a really cool feature. Even though you have to, I believe, long rest to use it every time. The Thrashing Pit is your classic, like, just aggressive, mean, like, mosh pit dancer, I guess. I thought that was a really funny subclass to kind of acknowledge. So you can use dexterity instead of strength for unarmed strikes and athletics checks. The free mosh ability is literally basically shoving enemies or helping allies. It's like you're either shoving them into the mosh pit or pulling them out of the mosh pit, I guess. So you can use the help action as a bonus action. Just some funny ideas. But you're still a support class. You're still helping all your allies. You're screaming and helping them, attack or something. You're never really. It never leaves the fact that you are a support class. Still, it just adds different, interesting flavors to that support. And then Weave Teaser is the one where it just adds spellcasting, which that's fine. We've got 7 subclasses. I will allow you to have one of them basically be like, all right, fine, you want to cast spells, here's your spells. You add like Druidcraft as a cantrip, and then Wizard and Sorcerer spells, and there's just a few little abilities that are around, being able to use spells in different ways, or having somebody, I think, use you as a conduit for spell casting from different ranges or something, but mostly you just gain spells. There's an odd thing where you don't actually gain spell slots, you have spell charges, and your spells go up as you level, which is kind of a weird combination of the Sorcerer's sorcery points, or there's a variant rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide I believe you can use instead of spell slots, and the Warlock's scaling spell level slots. So, I appreciate the fact that it doesn't just fall back on plain old spell slots, even though that kind of ends up mostly being the same thing. So because all your spell charges replenish on a long rest. So, but there's your spellcaster. Really, really, honestly, well-designed class with a huge ton of different specializations with the subclass, and I just love that it feels like, you're filling that support role, but you're not a pure spellcaster. Even when you're a weave teaser, you're not a pure spellcaster, and instead you're really using all of your flares. You're using all these unique abilities which you have chosen and continue to choose as you level up, which makes leveling up in this class, very rewarding and exciting. And you are what the bard should have been, damn it. So I appreciate the designer for, to me, essentially fixing what the bard should have been in D&D, which is the martial support class using unique abilities to, cause AoE buffs and AoE debuffs or single targeted things or doing a few attacks here and there and all of that. So I really love the design of this class. I think it's very cool, very unique, and is a huge thumbs up. My pros and cons for the dancer class. Pros: over 20 dance flares that uniquely define the dancer's actions and bonus actions. As I mentioned, that's pretty much what you're going to be doing. This class does not okay, I'm going to cast a spell or I'm going to attack. You're basically using your flares. Now, some of your flares are basically just an attack or, a single buff or something, but they all involve, a lot of them are rolling the your flare dice, and they're scaling up as you level. So even the ones that, are generally what feel like low level, they would still become better because they scale off those flare dice, and your flare dice, you're going to start rolling more of those. So it's a neat concept that I think you actually are going to be using those things constantly. Pro: 7 subclasses that cover a range of specializations from frontline warriors to spellcasters and controllers. I couldn't think of anything that we didn't fit in terms of what kind of subclasses I would like to see. Maybe the only thing I could think of is I would have maybe changed one of them, like the Noble Court, to somebody who used dancing as a way to steal from people. Maybe add some kind of roguish sleight of hand things to people and had some sneakiness to it, or could use that to vanish and reappear, something like that. I guess the Sylvan one kind of does that a little bit, but otherwise that's being pretty nitpicky. Honestly, with 7, I think we get a huge amount of cool subclasses here, and it's generally mostly thumbs up. And pro: professional layout design. It looks like a great product. Maybe it could have used a little bit more art throughout here, but I appreciate the tables, all look good. Everything looks like it's an official class product. And I like the way this product is put together and looks. My only con, I did include this as a con, which I think the higher level abilities just aren't very exciting, namely the 18th level and 20th level features, Elusive and Curtain Call. It just doesn't feel like there's a fun reason to necessarily go that high with the Dancer in terms of a pure support class. The subclasses do a little bit of a better job, and I will say I appreciate subclasses that front load their features and abilities versus having to wait until you level up to actually, really feel like you're specialized. So I do like that, but I just don't think the higher level Dancer features or abilities are exciting enough to warrant going all the way with that class. Final verdict: the Dancer is everything I want in a full class design, filling an underserved role with unique gameplay that doesn't fall back on spellcasting, and plenty of subclasses to further specialize and explore that class's full potential. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to platinum patrons Joe, Will, Ty Dancer, Christopher, Thomas, Adam, Stan, Alex, Cam, William, I'm Loud, and Lachlan Baird, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Scully, Nick, Farty Blood Angel, Veronis, Babu, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, James, and Kyle. Thank you all very much for your support.